There is a truth older than memory, more enduring than flesh, and far more intimate than breath. The human soul is not confined to the body, nor is it extinguished at death. For all our science, our logic, and our systems, we remain, at our deepest core, mystics. Death, then, is not the end. It is a threshold, a veil between states of consciousness, a transformation that strips away the illusions of the temporal, revealing the eternal. The soul, that inner, immortal essence, journeys beyond the boundary of physical life, not into a void, but into a dimension that reflects the contents of the psyche itself. To understand what happens to the soul after death, we must look not outward into material phenomena, but inward at the moment of death. There is a quiet and sacred detachment that begins, a separation of the soul from its physical shell, like a breath gently leaving the lips of the universe. The body, which has served as a vessel, a home, a prison, and a battlefield, can no longer hold the energy that animated it, but death is not destruction, it is a change in condition. The ego, which once clung to survival, once built its identity through the tangible, begins to loosen its grip as the boundaries of time and space blur. However, it is not the ego that truly continues. The ego is merely a mask, a functional tool for navigating the world of matter. The soul is something far more ancient, something that existed before the body and will continue beyond it, and as it begins to separate from the body, it carries with it all the experiences, all the images, all the psychological impressions that formed the tapestry of the individual's life. This process is not governed by physical laws, but by psychic ones, and so the transition is deeply symbolic, deeply personal, and profoundly archetypal. The soul moves not through empty darkness, but into a realm that feels strangely familiar, as if it had always existed in the background of our consciousness. In this transitional space, what the ancients called the threshold, the soul encounters the echoes of its own inner world. There are no angels with trumpets, nor devils with pitchfork, only reflections of the self, magnified, intensified, stripped of pretense and illusion. This is not judgment, but illumination, for the soul sees not what others thought of it, but what it truly is beneath all masks and narratives. It sees its own fears, desires, truths, betrayals, kindnesses, and denials, not as memories but as living presences. These psychic forces take shape and form, not because the afterlife is theatrical, but because the psyche speaks in images, in symbols, in felt realities. One does not merely recall a moment of cruelty or tenderness. One steps into it, lives it again, feels its reverberation through time, and understands it not as a linear event, but as a consequence that ripples through the fabric of being. The soul, in this sense, undergoes a profound act of seeing, a psychological unmasking, where all that was suppressed, repressed, or ignored rises into awareness. It is here that many encounter what might be called the shadow, the hidden and often feared aspects of the self that were too painful or shameful to face in life. Yet even these dark elements are not punishments, but invitations to wholeness, opportunities to understand and integrate the parts of oneself that were split off in order to survive. In this sacred encounter, the soul is not passive. It is active, searching, feeling, remembering, releasing. The process is not linear or measured in time. It is a spiral, a dance of meaning, a descent into the depths followed by a reemergence into higher understanding. The soul begins to see that the purpose of life was never simply to succeed or to avoid suffering, but to become aware of itself, to know its patterns, to embrace its contradictions, and to recognize the divine thread that runs through all experiences. As the ego dissolves and the soul expands, there is no sense of finality but of continuation. Something essential moves forward, not into oblivion, but into a deeper state of being where truth cannot be distorted, where masks fall away, and where one stands before the mirror of eternity, not as a sinner or saint, but as a soul becoming more fully itself in a world that no longer hides what the physical world so often obscured. Beyond the moment of separation from the body, the soul enters a realm that is not governed by the logic of time or the measurements of space, but instead shaped entirely by the contents of the inner world it carried throughout its earthly life. This dimension is not foreign, it is eerily familiar, because it is built from the very fabric of the unconscious mind. Here, symbols become substance, emotions take on form, and thoughts create environment. The soul no longer navigates with the physical senses, but with a deeper form of knowing, one that feels more instinctual, more ancient, and closer to truth than anything ever known while embodied. In this realm, the laws of the material world no longer apply. What you feel becomes what you see, and what you believe manifests as surroundings, companions, trials, or revelations. If a soul has lived a life of repression, deception, or denial, it may find itself surrounded by echoes of that psychological condition, not as punishment, but as a necessary confrontation with what was left unresolved. These are not hallucinations or fantasies. They are psychological realities made visible, tangible, and inescapable. In this post-physical dimension, the soul is not a passive observer, but an active participant in a psychic theater that reflects its own truths, a kind of dream, space that feels more real than waking life because it arises from the deepest layers of being. The images that appear here are archetypal in nature, universal symbols drawn from the collective unconscious that represent the soul's mental journey. One might encounter guides not as external angels or deities, but as projections of inner wisdom, the wise old man, the nurturing mother, the trickster, or the judge, each an embodiment of an aspect of the self that the soul needs to confront, integrate, or transcend. These encounters are not scripted. They are evoked by the resonance of the soul's own condition. For the one who lived with love, honesty, and a striving toward wholeness, the landscape may reflect beauty, harmony, and light. For the one who lived in fear, avoidance, and fragmentation, the same world may appear shadowed, confusing, or even terrifying. But again, this is not retribution, it is revelation. It is the soul seeing its inner architecture clearly, without the veil of ego or the distortions of societal roles. As the soul moves through this symbolic reality, it begins a process of psychic integration. Experiences that were compartmentalized in life begin to come together, forming a fuller picture of who the person really was, not the persona worn for others, but the authentic self with all its contradictions. This phase could be likened to a deep inner therapy, where the soul comes face to face with every unhealed wound, every denied truth, every unlived potential. The soul reviews its life not from a place of guilt, but from a place of deeper comprehension, recognizing how each choice shaped its path and how each event, whether joyful or painful, held the potential to evolve consciousness. There is a strange kind of justice here, not in the form of divine judgment, but in the unfolding of cause and effect within the psyche itself. The inner world becomes a feedback loop that teaches, reveals, and transforms. The soul may linger in this space until it has gleaned the meaning it needs, until the fragments of self have been drawn together into a more unified whole. There is no fixed duration for this journey, for it exists outside the constructs of linear time. What matters is the depth of realization, the willingness to accept truth, and the courage to integrate what has been divided. In this way, The soul is not merely wandering but working, growing, and evolving in a reality that is shaped from within, illuminated by the unconscious now made conscious, and moved not by the rhythms of breath or heartbeat, but by the pulsing force of transformation that draws it always toward greater inner wholeness as the soul continues its journey through the post-physical dimension, shaped and animated by the symbolic echoes of its inner life. It begins to approach a point of transition once again, not back into the physical realm immediately, but into a stage where decisions, or rather, natural unfoldings, occur based on the level of integration and awareness the soul has achieved. What becomes clear in this state is that the soul is not lost in chaos, but drawn toward one of several possible directions, each aligned with its unique frequency, its psychological development, and the weight of its unresolved energies or harmonized truth. For some souls, there is an undeniable pull toward returning to the physical plane, to re-enter life through rebirth, not as a punishment or karmic cycle in the simplified sense, but as a natural movement toward further development, as if the soul itself recognizes that certain lessons remain unlearned, certain aspects of the self still fragmented or undeveloped. This return is not decided by an external authority, but is almost like a magnetism created by the soul's own incompletion, an inner agreement to try again, to refine its understanding, to experience more of itself through another life shaped by new circumstances, different challenges, and further opportunities to move closer to psychological and spiritual wholeness. Other souls, having reached a degree of deep integration, do not return but ascend, or rather expand, and to levels of consciousness no longer tethered to personal identity in the way we understand it. These souls begin to merge into wider fields of experience where individuality still exists, but is tempered by an awareness of the interconnectedness of all being, like drops entering a great river, yet retaining their unique vibration within the flow. Here the soul may function as a guide, a source of inspiration, a quiet whisper in the dreams of those still in earthly form, not by force or decree, but by resonance, by presence. It is as though the soul, having seen its own depths and made peace with its own contradictions, becomes available to serve, to assist other evolving consciousnesses, and to contribute to the vast, mysterious unfolding of existence itself. This level of being is not sterile or abstract. It is rich with symbol, color, movement, and meaning, yet it is not weighed down by the density of form or the struggle of ego. It is not eternal rest, nor is it passive bliss. It is dynamic, creative, and deeply alive, in a way that earthly life can only dimly reflect. Then, there are those souls who have reached a rare state where duality dissolves entirely, where the soul no longer perceives itself as separate, even subtly, from the source of all consciousness. This is not annihilation but completion, not erasure but full union with the archetypal self, the infinite consciousness that animates all life. In this state, the soul does not become less but more, not isolated but universally connected, not dissolved into nothingness but unfolded into everything. This union cannot be explained in words because it lies beyond the opposites of being and non-being, beyond the grasp of mind, beyond even the symbols that once guided the soul through its inner terrain. It is the final alchemical marriage, the mystical unity that all myths hint toward, where the soul, having passed through the fire of life and the mirror of death, becomes what it always was in essence, but could never fully remember while confined in flesh and fear. Yet even as some souls reach this state, the dance continues. Others return, others ascend, others wait in reflection, and all are part of a greater whole that moves not in a straight line but in spirals, in rhythms, in archetypal patterns of becoming. Death, then, is not the opposite of life but a necessary part of it, a sacred interval between expressions of being, A deep breath between the notes of the eternal song, the soul is learning to sing through each journey across the veil of form and into the truth of what it truly is beneath all illusions of separation or time. So, what happens to the soul after death? It continues, it evolves, it remembers. Death is not the great eraser, it is the great revealer. What is hidden in life becomes visible in death. What is unconscious becomes conscious. The soul does not fall into darkness, but passes through it into a more essential light. We need not fear this passage, for it is as ancient and necessary as birth itself. If we live with integrity, with a sincere relationship to our inner world, we prepare ourselves not only for a meaningful life, but for a meaningful death. In truth, the soul is never lost. It only moves, always toward wholeness, always toward the self that waits beyond the veil.